Story 1. Not exactly a "I don't work here," but she was totally complaining to the wrong person. Some years ago, when I recently got hired at my current hospital and was assigned to the emergency room, I am a general practitioner. I had an encounter with a woman who refused to understand that not any person with scrubs and a white coat can treat a patient. To give you an idea of the setting, the observation unit was a giant square room with around 20 beds in total, separated by curtains. In the middle was the main counter where I and another doctor had our computers alongside the whole nursing team. General practitioners like me were in charge of patients who had not been hospitalized or were being treated by another service. Nevertheless, because our unit had the most amount of beds, it was not uncommon for some patients who were not our responsibility to be assigned one until they could go to the correct unit. It was 8 o'clock on a Saturday morning, and my coworker and I had just ended our round and were updating the medical records when a woman, let's call her Louisa, came to the counter. "Louisa, excuse me, you didn't check my dad, and we have been here for 2 hours. Me. Am sorry, what's the bed number, please?" 109. "Let me see in the system." "Oh, I get it. Sorry, Mom, but it says here your father is being treated by the internal medicine group. I will call them to see when they are coming." "Thanks." I asked one of the nurses if she could call the internists to tell them they had a pending evaluation in our unit, and then continued with my work. 20 minutes later, Louisa came again, asking if I could see her dad. "Is there something wrong? If a patient in my unit is decompensated, I could treat him even if I was not his assigned doctor." No, he is fine, but no one has come to see him." "I will try again." This time, I personally called the internal medicine office and told an internist about the patient in bed 109. He said he would be there after finishing floor duty. To make a long story short, for the next 4 hours, I had Louisa coming over and over every 20 minutes to see if I could attend to her dad. I repeatedly told her no and tried to contact his doctor multiple times by calling, sending a nurse, and even going to the internal medicine office myself, only to be rebuffed because they were busy. I think both Louisa and I were on our last nerves when the final clash occurred. It was 12 o'clock and lunchtime for me, so I got up from the counter and was midway to the exit door when Louisa jumped in front of me like a literal jump. It was quite hilarious in retrospect. "Where are you going?" "Lunch." "You can't go. No one has seen my dad." "Mom, I already told you a dozen times that he is not my patient. I have tried multiple times to get his doctor here, but he won't come. I can't do anything else." "Then why the heck are you here if you can't do anything for someone sick? He is going to die because you are just lazy." "That's not what's happening. I don't even know what your dad has. I knew the main diagnosis, but not all that could be attached." "See, you are useless. That's why health is so messed up. Useless doctors like you stealing our money and doing nothing." "Listen, woman, you don't have to be. Do something, or I will sue you." "Fine, but shut up for God's sake." This may not sound serious, but by treating a patient's family like that, I could have been in very big trouble. We are taught to be tolerant to the maximum point, and even then, exploding like that is not good. Also, keep in mind that all the shouting had attracted a lot of attention, and at least 10 or more people saw the scene. That would be a fun talk with HR. Louisa was as shocked as I was, but I decided to take the opportunity to tell her to follow me, and she complied without any more shouting. I guided her to the internal medicine office and literally shoved her inside, telling her they were the guys she needed to talk to. According to the grapevine cough asterisk, the nurse's asterisk cough, it was like I had thrown a hungry coyote into the henhouse. Total chaos. After eating something and calming myself down, I came back to my workplace, and surprisingly enough, Louisa was there waiting for me to apologize. We both understood the situation had been very stressful for both of us, and it got out of our hands. No complaints were made, and luckily, no one else reported me, so my indiscretion was forgotten before it reached the higher-ups. Her father was moved to the internal medicine floor, so after that, I never saw her again. You could say this was the happy ending of this long story. Story 2. For some background, my mother comes from a Jewish family. A very loud, shouty mother, an actually pretty nice father who turned into a pretty nice grandfather too, and 2 older brothers. My mother had kids when she was in her late 30s, and her parents had her when they were in their late 30s. So my grandparents were already pretty old when I was growing up. From the time I can remember, my grandmother was blind, and both of them were pretty stooped and hunched over. My grandfather died when I was about 11, and my grandmother died when I was about 13 or 14. This story takes place when my grandmother died. When her husband, my grandfather, passed away before her, it came as an objectively crappy surprise. So in order to help support her, all of the siblings decided to give up their inheritances back to their mother so she could afford an in-home care assistant and other necessities. Remember, she was blind as a bat. She had the damn hearing of one too. You could never slip anything past her. It was maddening. When she finally kicked the bucket, we had never been close. She was an angry Jewish mother until the very end. It was finally time to split the estate, but they'd already settled everything before she died. The middle uncle, who we will call Awkward Uncle, that's really all I can call him. He's worthy of a whole other subreddit though. Really did not at all want any of the inheritance that had been promised to him. Had long since abstained from being included in the estate. He was a vet and apparently saved up quite a bit of money before he had to go on benefits, and he barely spent any of his benefits. He just let him sit in his bank accounts. He actually left me a very nice inheritance, which I appreciated. I miss that weird jerk. So basically, this left my mother as a recipient, and the oldest sibling, the antagonist of this story. 'Twas my uncle did the dastardly deed and broke up the family, said I. A little bit of background on him. He was well, I didn't learn a lot of this until I was older, but the guy had serious anger management issues. Unfailingly religious, incredibly egotistical, and quite chauvinistic, misogynistic, with a sprinkle of racism and a whole lot of homophobia to go with. He was absolutely infuriating to be around. He was basically the worst kind of Jew you could ever imagine. He was not just a regular at the synagogue. He was the kind of person who took a leadership role in the community and basically lived there. Whenever we would come to visit, I would only see him in the afternoons around lunchtime and in the evening around dinner. He was literally at synagogue the entire rest of the time. I think he usually woke up around 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock in the morning just to head out and go do whatever Orthodox Jews do. My mother and our family kept it pretty light. He was basically incapable of holding down a job and had gone through a stint of office jobs before basically returning to be a house husband. Except, he did nothing house-related at all. His wife still managed to do all of the cleaning and cooking and nurturing for the family. Despite being a mathematician with several PhDs to this day, I have no idea why she stays with him, but she does. Literally, she pays all of their bills, supports him and her 2 idiot children, literally. My 30-year-old cousin still calls him daddy. It's repugnant, while somehow still managing to do big important people math. I will never understand. When you stir all this up into a little witch's brew, you create the perfect scenario for family drama. Here's how it went down. The estate had been broken up into 2 pieces. Every aspect of my grandma's stuff, her house, her accounts, yada yada, had been divided evenly between the 2 of them. The house was sold, credit cards were canceled, and there were lawyers involved on both sides to make sure everything was done fairly. It was actually several years after this whole thing had settled that he even made the phone call to my mom that I heard as a little 13-year-old peeking in the doorway. My mother is half deaf, so I pretty much heard the entire conversation, but she has filled me in on the more important bits that I missed. He called her clear out of the blue one day, as he called her very infrequently, and after about 15 minutes of niceties over the phone, the show started. My mother: so what's up? Are you thinking of coming up to visit? Him: no, actually, I wanted to talk to you about the estate really quickly. My mother: wait, Mom's estate? Him: yeah, I was going through some of the paperwork today because I was looking for something, and I noticed that we made a mistake on one of the accounts. My mother, oh damn, are you serious? Him, yeah, I found some paperwork from one of her accounts, and my name was the only name on it, but we split the money inside of it. I need you to send me back that dollar. My mother, utterly confused. Why? Lol. Him, well, because it's my money. My name was the only name on that account, and we accidentally split it up. I was going to send you the statements I found so you could see. My mom's a lot smarter than people think she is. I don't doubt for a second that she remembered every single account number, or at least had them written down somewhere. She always saved every little bit of paperwork or scrap of legal, whatever that she scribbled on. She's got files on top of files on top of files of just 30 years worth of family drama. I don't think this trifling brainlet knew that though. My mother, no. You remember we split that money 100% down the middle, right? Him, yeah, but it's mine and I need it back. My mother, I bought a new kitchen with that money. You came over for the holidays and saw the kitchen. Him, well, I suppose you could start paying me back in installments. My mother, are you out of your mind? If you recall, there were plenty of bank accounts that had just my name on them. Those ones were split evenly down the middle too. Him, Mom wanted that one to be just for me. My mother, if that was the case, then why didn't she put that in her wishes? She told us this stuff when she was still alive. There's no way you don't remember this. Him, well, she told me and not you. I'm older, and she knew I'd need that account. My mother, listen, is this going to turn into a thing? Like, should I call my lawyer? I can't tell if you're joking or not right now. This is around when I heard the yelling. You know, Jewish mother and all. I came out of my room and I just sort of leaned on the threshold and listened. Him, am willing to get mine involved if you need more clarification. Can they send you the papers? My mother, no. I can't believe you would be this selfish right now. If you're really going to do this, take me to court. She slammed the phone down after that. I remember asking her if she was okay, and she vented a little bit, but otherwise I didn't think much of it. It wasn't until years later that I asked as an adult if he actually ended up trying to sue her. I thought he wouldn't. Apparently, he absolutely did. Now, it didn't go very far. There was supposed to be a court date where they were going to both show up in front of a judge or something, but my mother got a phone call. I don't know how court systems work out, and I really didn't ask for that many details. But apparently his lawyer realized that he didn't have a case, and basically just fired his client. I think lawyers can do that, right? I'm 26 and I've never had to deal with one before, so don't sue me? Story 3. To summarize, my mother-in-law parked across the road from my neighbor's driveway. They started losing their minds as they believed it to be their property. This led to some shouting and, of course, a call to the police. So, as you can probably guess, yes, the driveway overlords did indeed phone the police. After her threats, we waited around for my mother-in-law to be taken away for committing the ultimate crime, parking on a public street. I know, please try to hold judgment. However, like most close-knit streets, our other neighbors came out to see what all the fuss was about. And oh, did we get the gossip. It turns out we aren't the only people she's complained about. Social carers for the elderly, visitors for other houses, council workers, and even people who live on the street have all received notes and stern warnings from our delightful neighbors about our property. Although we were the lucky ones who finally pushed them over the edge. Well, they finally arrived. We can see their house from our window, so it was prime viewing. The lady of the driveway came running out of the house, clutching a mug of what I can only guess are the tears of orphan children. They went into her house and closed the door, and so we waited, praying, hoping that they would come across to get our side of the story. Well, our wish was granted. But let me tell you, it was so much sweeter than we could have imagined. After watching the officer poking his head out the door like a meerkat, trying to figure out where the car was that was blocking their driveway, she gave him a hand and pointed to my mother-in-law's car parked across the street. This poor fella looked more confused than a drunk with a calculator. He eventually went back inside before heading over to our house, and that's where the real fun began. He came to our door, and we greeted him with a customary, "Hi, what can we do for you, officer?" Here is the following conversation from what I can remember. Officer: Good morning. We received a complaint about a car from this property blocking a driveway. My mother-in-law: Hey there, yeah, we've been expecting you. Officer: Are you the resident here? Mother-in-law: No, my son and daughter-in-law are, but it's my car that's been reported. The silver one across the street from their house. Officer: So, am having trouble understanding the issue. Was your car parked across their driveway? Mother-in-law: Nope, it's been parked in the same space since I got here. Officer: Well, your neighbor is claiming you blocked their car in their drive and were trespassing. Mother-in-law: Oh, we know. She's been leaving notes on my cars and others in the street. She's been claiming that the entire section of the road is part of her personal driveway. You can ask the other neighbors. Officer: What notes? Has she asked you to move? Me, kind of. She told us and the rest of the neighbors that they would try not to hit our cars. Officer: What do you mean? Me: She's been accusing us all of parking in her driveway, across the street from her house on the public road. I even have a photo of where the car was parked a few hours ago. I showed him the photo, making sure to point out the time and date it was taken, and he just shook his head. He asked if there was anything else he should know before dealing with the matter. We were more than happy to fill him in on how she came to my door to stamp her feet in disapproval, throwing all the aggressively condescending "it's illegal, sweetheart" she could our way. He asked if we felt threatened. I said no, but I wasn't happy that she was yelling at me while holding my baby. He said he understood, and we encouraged him to talk to the neighbors to get a full picture of what's going on. So, that's exactly what he did, and oh boy, it was all so much worse than I thought. For them. In our street, news travels fast. We're gossipy little folks. We even have our own street WhatsApp group. Yeah, I know it's kind of sad, but we're all friends. Lockdown really brought us together. The officer did in fact make his way down the doors, and they were all more than happy to rat them out after all their griping. It turned out that not only had they been harassing other people for parking near their home, but they had also been witnessed exiting the car looking a little wobbly. Wobbly as in 3 sheets to the wind, drunk as a skunk. One can only assume this is why he needs 20+ feet to reverse into his drive. His wife, the lady of the driveway and a pain in my life, has been spreading rumors that other people were having affairs. However, the piece de resistance was revealed to us when the officer came back to our house. When the officer asked about our trespassing on our property, she told the police officer I trained my cat to do her business in her plant pots. My huge, fluffy, and attitude-fueled kitty had been having his morning poop in her begonias. His name is Stanford, and he is renowned in our street for being a sassy little jerk, sitting on top of cars, sneaking into people's houses and sleeping on their beds, and of course, tormenting dogs. I have never been prouder of him. In the end, the officer went back to her house and, from what we can tell, told her to stop being a fool, and if they were caught drunk driving, they would be arrested. Any more notes or coming to people's doors, and they could be charged with harassment due to the volume and nature of the events. Essentially, they were told to get a grip, and the officer went off to attend to actual crimes. Now the neighbor parks across the street from his driveway in protest, and the rest of the street accommodates by parking directly in front and behind him, as is our right by law. I hope my cat held eye contact while he was pooping on her plants. Story 4. This story is long. This is 6 years' worth of illegal practices and abuse. It's super cathartic for me to write this, and I'm going to spare no expense on the dirt. I've now been out of the company long enough that I feel safe and secure enough to post about how I left my 6-year-long career at a famous chain sub shop. I've always posted stories about entitled customer experience from there, but this one will be about my super entitled boss, and how I got my sweet revenge when I finally left the company. How it started. When I was 25, I was in a pretty weird situation where I needed a job, and I could not afford to be picky about which one I got. I just happened to be in a local sub shop asking the manager if they were hiring, and the owner was there that day. He hired me on the spot, and I started working the next day. Training went quick, and I was working 40 hours a week and finally earning some money. My first red flag that something here was not exactly normal was the fact that the manager quit less than a month after I had been hired. She had asked for weekends off to be with her children, and the owner told her no. She actually made a fully functional schedule that worked for everyone that gave her Saturdays off. He put her back to Wednesdays off, so she just walked out. I was promoted to manager with less than a month of training under me. But I was determined to stay with the job, and I was going to enjoy the dollar raise that came with it. So I taught myself how to do inventory and food orders. I taught myself how to make schedules and do all the other things that a sub-shop manager does. I actually got pretty good at it. After a year of doing it, I had expedited the inventory process and made it so functional, the owner had me teach other managers that he hired at his other franchise locations. He owned 6 shops total. They were scattered all over the place, and 2 of them, one I worked at, were less than a mile from each other. He decided he wanted to have a monopoly in the city and bought the last sub-shop in the area. He made me area manager and put me at the new location. Basically, my daily job was this: show up at 11 a.m. to relieve the store opener. Make sure that everything is functioning. Work until 7 p.m. when I would be relieved by the closer. Then I would drive to the other 2 locations to check and make sure everything was okay. Some days I will drive to a location in the morning before my shift starts, and I will drive to a location after my shift starts. On Tuesdays I did inventories, and on Wednesdays I did 3 stores worth of delivery orders. The store I was working at was slow enough that it technically only needed 1 person working at a time with a little overlap during the lunch and dinner rush. It kind of sucked sometimes. If it got busy, you were doing it all on your own. You had to help customers during your lunch break. And you didn't technically get breaks. Going to the bathroom was a gamble. I still dread hearing that doorbell go off when I was in the middle of doing my business. At first, it was a perfectly reasonable job. I had the stores operating effectively. Everything was organized. Inventory counts were very accurate, and there was very little shrink. Customers were happy. That lasted about 6 months before things started getting illegal. I think my boss was having some kind of personality problems and was taking it out on his staff. Both he and his wife came from super rich families. Millionaires. I have been to their mansion one time for a birthday party. Indoor and outdoor pool, private movie theater complete with bar and popcorn maker. They had cash to burn. The first illegal thing happened when our store got broken into. A thief broke the window with a rock and tried to find the cash box. As it was locked in the safe, he didn't get anything, but he did pry open the till drawer to find it empty. The police called me since my number was on the whiteboard marked as emergency contact. I showed up and took inventory and told the police the thief had stolen nothing. I even gave them video footage of the thief. Few days later, a cop came back and asked me to confirm how much had been stolen from the store. I told him $. It turns out, my boss had reported a loss of $500 from the cash box. I'm not sure if he got fined for filing a false police report, but he showed up at work the next day and yelled at me. He told me, "You don't tell the cops anything unless I give you permission next time." Over the next couple of months, he also started becoming a penny pincher at all of his locations. He would jack up the price of the subs to the maximum amount he was allowed to buy the franchise. He would skimp on the veggies and would yell at us if we put on the recommended amount. If the recipe called for 8 slices of turkey, he told us to put on 6, basically pissing off all my regulars. It killed our business, which meant we were earning less, which made him more of a penny pincher. Things started breaking in the store, and he wouldn't hire professionals to fix it. He would bring in friends and pay them in beer. I remember his mechanic friend coming in to fix our freezer over 10 times in a year. It never properly kept the food at freezing temperatures and leaked water into the freezer. When health inspectors would come in, they would point it out, and my boss would say, "Yeah, I'm getting it fixed next week." I was so nervous getting frozen food out of the freezer that was basically 33 degrees all the time. Our frozen bread was floppy half the time. I dealt with this for multiple years. I know I'm an idiot. I should've run away long ago. But I was literally living hand to mouth. And me and my husband were trying to keep a roof over our head. We were both working 60+ hours a week. We just didn't have our lives together enough to be picky. If I was going to leave that store, I would need to find a job that paid 1.5 times the minimum wage as a starter pay to make the same amount I was doing 60 hours a week as the area manager. It was when my boss started doing illegal labor law practices that I began seriously looking to leave. I handled faxing in the payroll at the end of every week. There's always a little star next to your clocking out when the time has been altered. It'll fix it if somebody forgets to clock in, forgets to clock out, etc. I started noticing that everybody's hours have been adjusted multiple times on multiple days. The boss was cutting people's hours back by half an hour plus. If they clocked in at 6, he would change it to 6:30. I pointed this out to him. He uses the excuse that they just stand around and waste time every shift, so I take that time away. He installed video cameras. He would literally watch them from home with a stopwatch and send me a text at the end of the day telling me to retract certain amounts of time off of everybody's shift. I told him no. If he wanted this done, he could do it himself. It was crazy illegal, and I wanted no part of it. I also discovered something one year when he was showing me how to do the year-end reports for tax filing. Even though the stores were a franchise and were all owned and operated by him and his wife. Each individual store he had registered under a different business name and a different bank. I.e., you worked at Store A, you got a paycheck from Waldo & Sons LLC, and if you covered somebody's shift at Store B the same week, you got a second paycheck from Waldo Inc. Act. I asked him why he did this, as it seemed incredibly unnecessary and complicated. He told me it was for tax purposes. He paid less taxes if he registered each store as its own individual franchise. I pointed out that this was illegal. He said he could get away with it by claiming that each store was owned by somebody else in his family. I.e., the store was owned by his wife. The store was in his name. This store was in his brother's name, etc. It was super shady. I had already been here 6 years dealing with this nonsense. I was fixing to leave very soon. I had enough saved up to cover bills for at least 3 months to give me time to find a new job. I kept telling him that if he pushed me too far, I would leave him high and dry with no area manager, and he would have to come all the way out to man the stores himself. He showed up to the stores maybe once a week. He mostly went to the stores closest to his house. He hated having to drive the hour-long drive from where he lived to my 3 stores way out in the boondocks. The day finally came where he pushed me to my breaking point. Inspectors of the franchise came monthly. They were technically required to find 3 things wrong at every location, because nobody could be perfect. There were minor, moderate, and major errors that they could find. Major errors got the owner fined. I had only had 1 major error found between my 3 stores in the 6 years there. But one day the boss called and yelled at me because of a burnt-out light bulb in the oven. It was a minor error, but he laid into me like I had just gotten the store shut down. It was so bad, my mother and father heard him yelling at me through the phone speaker. My dad promised to cover my rent until I can get a new job. I just sat silently and let him yell. When it was over, I said, "Okay, I'll do better tomorrow," then hung up. That night, I stayed up super late finding all the phone numbers for L&I, OSHA, and all the legal resources I could. The next day, I didn't go to work. I stayed home making phone calls. I still had texts from the boss telling me to adjust people's hours. I had recordings from our security cameras of him changing the dates on the prepped food so we didn't throw it away as soon. I even had 5 years plus worth of pay stubs from 3 different business names, owned by 3 different people, but all signed by him. L&I was incredibly interested to hear about the time clock adjustments. They happily accepted emailed copies of all my text logs, and several dozen pages of fax pay stub. I also learned that he should have been paying me overtime for working 20 hours extra each week. He told me I was paid. Yet he classified my pay as hourly. I ended up speaking to a couple of different people about his fraudulent tax money practices. Every single one of them wanted copies of my pay stub and proof that they were owned by the same person. The best call I saved for last. A call to the local health inspector. I informed them about the leaky freezer, the changing of dates on prepped food, the disgusting practice of keeping food far past its expiration date, the temp logbook that we literally just wrote down random numbers instead of actually taking the temps because it takes too long to do that every 2 hours, or my personal favorite, the time a plumber was fixing the toilet and it literally exploded poopy water out into our lobby. The boss made us keep the store open and mop it up quickly. Right in front of customers, the health inspector was very interested. All of these calls I did while getting dozens of angry voicemail texts from my boss asking me where I was, since I was literally supposed to be working a shift and didn't show up. The poor opener had to stay late, and the closer had to come in early. I felt a little bad about that, but I knew the next day the boss himself would have to come in to cover the shift unless he hired somebody and trained them overnight. I ignored every single one of his phone calls. I just never went back, not even for my last paycheck. I never heard back about getting all that unpaid overtime, but I did hear through the grapevine about the fallout of what happened the next few months. 2 of my boss's stores were completely shut down, as in, health inspectors put a red warning label on the doors and gave him 1 month to fix all of the problems before they would let him open again. He lost his franchise rights with the company. He had to sell all of his stores to other franchisees. Since he was still paying back loans on a couple of them, he had to sell them at a loss. Almost every single one of his employees working for him at the time got huge payouts for the missing time that he had removed from their time clock. One former employee I met up almost a year later, and he told me that he got a $5,000 check. He had only been there a year. I also learned that my boss got put on 2 years probation of prison time. And apparently he failed his first surprise drug test, so he ended up spending a couple weeks behind bars anyway. I found out through social media that my boss's wife left him for a year to let him get his head screwed on right, and when they got back together, she made him be a stay-at-home dad while she went out and ran the stores that were still in her name. It felt so good to let him sleep in the bed that he had made. I've got another job now, and I get paid the same amount that I was earning from him, but I only work 40 hours a week. I get actual lunch breaks now. I get overtime now. I actually didn't realize how illegal his practices had been until I started working a normal 9-to-5 job. To this day, the idea of taking a lunch break without having to help customers in the middle of it is just wonderful. Sorry for how long the story was, but I hope some people enjoy the absolute craziness that was my entitled boss. And now you all know why I will probably never eat at another chain franchise sub shop again. Edit. For everyone asking why I worked there so long under him, I already explained that. I was desperate and stupid. Most of the people working for him were. The teenage kids in transition didn't stay long enough to notice the repercussions. The other ones who stayed longer were mostly newly arrived citizens who were desperate for any job.